Now we get a gospel reading that makes it sound like Christmas is coming, right? We still don't have a baby, but there is talk about babies, and so we know it's coming soon. But I want to start with a little piece from the early church. In the earliest generations of our tradition, our faith, there were a lot of questions about who Jesus was exactly. And there were parts of the Christian community that felt that Mary was involved with this human figure, Jesus, that was somehow distinct from God and not to be confused with the Word, the Son of God from the beginning of all things, that they were separate entities. But there was another voice, the voice that would win out in the end, that would understand that Jesus is both fully human and fully divine. Both of those things. As Luther would say, in this baby, God joins with us in creation. And as we looked at this debate in the early church, there came about a word that would stand the test of time. Now, I know you haven't been to dinner parties lately, but this is a good word for you to hang on to so you can just throw it out there in the middle of things. The word is a Greek word, always a winner, Theotokos. Theotokos, God-bearer. The weight of that word, the power of that word. In fact, we've softened it as we moved it into English because there was a directness and a power in it that feels almost too much raw. Because of that, we will say Mother of God when we talk about Mary. But this morning, I want us to use Theotokos, God-bearer, the one who bore God. There is a power in that. But let's go now to the reading, right? The angel Gabriel comes. Now, we just had our Sunday school program, so we can think of paper cutouts, we can think of kids with angels' wings. The angel Gabriel really would have been seen in those early Christian communities as part of the heavenly host. And by host, thinking of an army. A first lieutenant of God's court, sent to do the important missions. Things were going to change. Something was going to be happening, breaking open creation and moving it towards life and light. And so Gabriel is the one who is tapped. Now Mary, a girl in her middle teen years most likely, in the original text, the wording is again more raw and more pointed than we tend to translate into English. It says that when Gabriel greeted Mary, she was perplexed and pondered. Is it just me? Or does perplexed and pondered sound like a 60-year-old English gentleman with a monocle, right? No. We're talking about a young girl in her middle teen years whose life is just about ready to be altered forever without coming back. She was shaken to her core, troubled, and did not understand what this greeting meant. Such that Gabriel says, "No, don't worry, don't be afraid. You have found favor with God." Let's stop there for a minute. You have found favor with God. Why her? Why there? Why then? It's interesting when we look at this because it says in Galilee, in Nazareth, which is a lot of Greek language that effectively says nowhere. In the middle of nowhere, Gabriel goes to a young girl of no account. And Luther points out perhaps one of the biggest miracles of this story, that Mary believed the words of Gabriel, that she was chosen by God and favored. What does that mean? In our world, we have all kinds of ways in which we determine who is favored and who is not. And it generally doesn't include people like Mary. Let's just look at the news over the last couple of days, right? Who is favored to receive a vaccine? It's a little close to home, I know. Stanford has gotten a little bit of publicity over the last couple of days for, of all places on the entire planet, having trouble with their algorithm for who gets the first shots in their medical facility. It turns out it wasn't those lowest on the totem pole who had a lot of exposure to COVID in the medical system. There's a lot of exhaustion, tension, well-meaning aspects of what's going on when we think about how this vaccine is rolled out. But who is favored? Do we have the right education? Do we live in the right place? Do we have the right job? Or is it who you know? Is it if you're rich or if you're somewhere else? We have all kinds of ways to put people on top, and perhaps, just as importantly, all kinds of ways to put people at the bottom. But Mary believed. God's understanding of favor, fortunately, is not ours. In our baptisms, we know that God makes us all on the same level, sisters and brothers, regardless of how our society and world may view one or the other. As we think about all of the ways in which we put people forward and back, Mary understood that she was the one who was favored. Now, is she getting a gift? A new car? A house? What is she getting? She's going to have a baby. This is scandalous. It's dangerous. Speaking of hospitals, there aren't any. This is a dangerous thing. She's not married. It's scandalous. Her whole life trajectory is going to be changed. Some from the outside might have said, wrecked. Wrecked. Think about that. When God breaks into our lives, when the good news comes to us, it's not some small thing. It's not a box of chocolate. It's not winning the lottery. It's upending everything. And that's not the easiest thing to take on. In popular culture, when we hear about Christians saying, what does it mean to bring Jesus Christ into your life? Often the language is how my life was a disaster and then Jesus came into my life and made everything good. But Shane Claiborne, noted evangelical progressive, commented in his talk at our National Youth Gathering in New Orleans that his life was going just fine until he met Jesus, who wrecked everything, upended his life, changed his trajectory. And I think one of the important things to remember at this point is that when Jesus breaks into our lives, he's not telling us that the choice is to drop everything and go to seminary. That's not the choice. Sure, some may go to seminary, but the idea is that Jesus did not come into the world to make professional Christians, but rather people who follow Christ's teaching and example, reaching out to the margins and putting others first in a world that insists and demands that we put ourselves first. That changes our lives. When our first question becomes, how does this affect my neighbor? Instead of, what am I getting out of this? Our lives are turned upside down. When we move through this story, we understand that in Mary, there is a sense of obedience and a willingness to follow and serve that is a model for all of us. There is a challenge to us as we look at Mary to understand how we too might follow. But again, circling back to where I started, I think sometimes when the language is a bit more direct and raw, it becomes a little more clear. Barbara Brown Taylor wrote about Mary and her response. She said of Mary, "You could say no when Gabriel came. Perhaps keep your head down in your book as you're reading. Keep your head and your eyes down until it's clear that the angel has left, and then straighten your hair, get back to your reading or whatever else you were doing, and pretend that nothing has happened. Or you could put the book down. Hear this strange creature and its strange ideas. Latch on to a mission and a purpose that you don't understand, maybe don't know how to do, a script that you do not know, that you might smuggle God into the world in your own body. That you might smuggle God into the world in your own body." Think about that. There is so much in that language. The idea that there are elements among us who would resist God coming into our world and upsetting everything, raising up the lowly and bringing down the high. That God is smuggled into this world in the body of Mary, but perhaps even taking it further, this is the image of the church. That the good news of God is continually smuggled into the world, and that we are a part of this calling. When we answer to God, "Here am I," "Here am I," even with all of our excuses, how can this be since I, as we hear in the text? Because with God, all things are possible. With God, all things are possible. And so as you ponder the Christmas story this year, as you ponder the miracle of Mary's response, of God coming among us, the story of the God-bearer, be mindful of how you too are being called to bear God into this world where the high are being brought low, where the low are being brought high. Amen.